A black janitor, Marcus Green, stood handcuffed in court, accused of a crime he didn't commit, when a veteran officer suddenly aimed a gun at his chest. Officer Richard Doyle, known for his ruthless, tough-on-crime approach, was seconds away from turning justice into humiliation. But fate had its own witness that day, Doyle's own son, an undercover FBI agent who rose from the gallery and changed everything. And just wait until you hear the shocking turn this courtroom drama took and how, in the end, justice rose higher than fear. The courtroom carried the kind of silence only a legal proceeding can hold, heavy, sharp, expectant. The judge sat high on the bench, the state seal glimmering above his head. Lawyers shuffled papers, clerks tapped on keyboards, the audience whispered in low tones. And in the center of it all stood Marcus Green. He wasn't a politician, a criminal mastermind, or a high-profile defendant. He was a janitor, a man in his 50s, dressed plainly, his work boots scuffed from years of long nights scrubbing the same marble floors now beneath his feet. For 15 years, Marcus had served this very courthouse. People had seen him mop up spills, fix flickering lights, carry boxes no one else wanted to lift. He was the kind of man most looked past, but who kept everything running. Yet today, he wasn't holding a mop. He was standing in front of a judge, accused of stealing supplies from the courthouse storage. The charge was thin, almost laughable to anyone who knew him. But Marcus didn't laugh. He stood quietly, hands cuffed in front of him, his back straight, but his eyes weighed down with humiliation. The judge cleared his throat. Lawyers adjusted their glasses. A case like this shouldn't have carried tension, and yet, tension filled the room. It was then that Officer Richard Doyle made his move. Doyle was no rookie. He was a veteran with 2 decades on the force, known in the community for being tough on crime. To some, that meant he didn't back down. To others, it meant he acted before he thought. He had a reputation for seeing threats where none existed, for drawing hard lines where nuance was needed. And now, with everyone watching, Doyle stepped closer to Marcus. His jaw was clenched, his hand twitching near his holster. His eyes didn't reflect caution, they reflected suspicion. In one startling motion, he pulled out his service weapon. The metallic sound of it leaving the holster cut through the air like a strike of lightning. And before anyone could process what was happening, the barrel was pointed squarely at Marcus Green's chest. The reaction was instant. Gasps shot through the audience like a wave. One woman let out a sharp cry and pulled her young son against her chest. The defense attorney dropped his pen, frozen. The judge's gavel, raised mid-motion, hung in the air, his mouth open in disbelief. Marcus didn't lunge, he didn't resist, he couldn't. His wrists were bound in steel. His hands trembled, raised just slightly, as though he were surrendering to something far greater than the man in front of him. His eyes widened, not with anger, but with terror and disbelief. Yet Doyle's voice cut through the chaos with authority. "He's about to resist, I can see it." The claim was absurd. Every single person in that room could see the truth. Marcus was restrained, vulnerable, powerless. There was no movement, no threat, nothing but a man standing helpless before the law. And yet, in that instant, the courthouse no longer felt like a trap. A stage where power was being abused in the open, with no shame, no hesitation. The audience didn't just feel shock, they didn't just feel fear. They felt something far stronger, far sharper: anger. Anger at the sight of an armed officer turning Judgment Day into a scene of intimidation. Anger at the sheer recklessness of pointing a weapon at a man who couldn't even lift his hands to defend himself. Anger at a system that allowed dignity to be stripped away so casually, so cruelly, right in the very place meant to protect it. The anger was quiet, unspoken, but it pulsed in the air, heavy enough for everyone to feel. And in that moment, Marcus Green was no longer just a janitor. He was a symbol. A man standing in chains, staring down the barrel of injustice. Marcus's lips trembled as he finally found the courage to speak. His voice was thin, breaking under the weight of fear. "I didn't do anything." The words barely carried across the courtroom, but for those close enough to hear, they were like a plea whispered into a storm. His eyes darted desperately from face to face, the judge, the clerk, the crowd, searching for just one sign of help, one hand raised in his defense. But no one moved. The weapon pointed at his chest might as well have been a verdict already delivered. It loomed over him like a sentence carved in stone, making every breath shallow, every second feel endless. The judge finally slammed his gavel, his voice sharp with command. "Officer Doyle, stand down immediately." But Doyle's response came louder, harder, shaking the room. "He's dangerous. He's ready to attack." The contradiction was unbearable. Everyone could see Marcus, wrists bound in cuffs, shoulders slumped, body trembling. A man with no means to fight, no strength to resist. And yet he was painted as a threat, his humanity reduced to suspicion and accusation. And in that moment, something cut deeper than fear. It was humiliation. For 15 years, Marcus had walked these same halls as a worker, not a defendant. He had been the one sweeping the corridors late at night, tightening loose screws on courtroom benches, replacing bulbs in the flickering ceiling lights. He had greeted clerks with a tired smile, opened doors for lawyers burdened with files, and nodded respectfully to the same officers who now looked at him as if he were a criminal. And now, in front of those very people, his dignity was stripped away. He wasn't seen as a neighbor, a colleague, or a familiar face who had given years of his life to serving this place. He was seen as a danger, a problem, a man worth aiming at. The pain spread through the courtroom like smoke, heavy, suffocating. It wasn't only Marcus who felt it. Those who knew him, those who had passed him in the halls for years, now felt it too. The crushing sorrow of watching a good man reduced to a caricature of suspicion. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed to meet his. Others clenched their fists on their laps, silently wrestling with the wrongness of it all. A few of Marcus's supporters, seated quietly in the back, fought back tears. It was the kind of pain that wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic. It was quieter but heavier, the kind that seeps into a room and leaves everyone unable to breathe the same way they did a moment before. And at the center of it stood Marcus Green, once invisible as a janitor, now painfully visible as a symbol of how quickly dignity could be stolen. The silence in the courtroom was crushing. Every heartbeat seemed louder than words, every breath heavier than air. Marcus's eyes darted once more, pleading for someone, anyone, to intervene. And then a voice broke through. "Dad." It was calm, but it carried a sharpness that sliced straight through the tension. From the gallery, a young man in a crisp navy suit stood. His posture was firm, his presence commanding. His name was Daniel Doyle. Few in the room knew him, and fewer still knew the weight he carried. To them, he looked like a well-dressed spectator who had come out of curiosity. But Daniel was not simply a son watching his father. He was a federal agent, FBI, working undercover in a separate case. He had returned to town only days earlier, blending into the background. Until now. Every head turned toward him. At the defense table, a lawyer's jaw dropped. In the back, whispers rippled like waves. And at the front, Officer Richard Doyle, the same man who had his weapon fixed on Marcus, froze, the muscles in his shoulders stiffening. "Dad," Daniel repeated, this time louder, steadier. His eyes didn't flinch. The word carried more power than a gavel. It wasn't just a son calling his father. It was a challenge, a confrontation in the most public stage possible. Then Daniel moved forward. The gallery parted slightly, as if instinctively making way. He reached into his jacket and with one smooth motion held up a badge. The golden letters caught the courtroom lights. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," Daniel announced, his voice echoing off the wooden panels of the chamber. "Lower your weapon now." The effect was immediate. The room erupted in stunned whispers. People leaned toward one another, whispering fragments of disbelief. "That's his son? FBI? Did you hear what he said?" It was more than shocking. It was unthinkable. The son of the officer, revealing himself not as an ally, not a silent family, but as a federal agent demanding accountability. Marcus lifted his head slightly, his eyes widening. For the first time since the weapon was drawn, there was something other than fear on his face. There was a flicker, small, fragile, but unmistakable. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this nightmare would not end with humiliation or silence. Hope that truth, delivered with courage, could still break through fear. Hope that one man standing up, even against his own blood, could shift the course of what seemed already decided. The entire courtroom leaned into that hope, the energy changing like a storm breaking apart to let in the first streak of light. For a breathless moment, the entire courtroom balanced on the edge of disaster. Richard Doyle's hand trembled, his finger hovering too close, his pride battling his reason. His face burned red with defiance, his jaw clenched like a man unwilling to back down. And yet, across from him, Daniel's gaze never faltered. His voice rang out, steady, unshakable. "If you shoot him, you'll have to shoot me first, and I promise you, you will never wear that badge again." The words echoed, louder than the gavel, sharper than any command. They weren't just a son's warning. They were a line drawn between justice and corruption, between what was right and what had gone too far. Silence fell, the kind of silence where even the air refused to move. For one agonizing second, it seemed Richard might still defy it all, father against son, power against conscience. But then the tension broke, his shoulders sagged, his grip loosened. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered the weapon. The spell shattered. Court officers surged forward, moving with precision. They seized Richard's arm, disarmed him, and pulled him back. His authority was gone, his defiance stripped away. For the first time, the officer who once commanded fear was the one being let out under watch. Marcus's knees buckled. He sank into the nearest chair, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. Tears welled in his eyes, but they weren't the tears of defeat. They were the release of years of invisibility, of being overlooked, undervalued, misjudged. For the first time, in front of everyone, he wasn't dismissed. He was defended. He was seen. The judge, his face still pale from shock, struck the gavel down firmly. "The charges against Marcus Green are dismissed, effective immediately." The words rolled like thunder, final and absolute. Daniel stepped closer to Marcus, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. His voice softened, but it carried enough weight for the entire room to hear. "No one points a gun at an innocent man on my watch." The room erupted. Applause thundered from the gallery, a release of all the fear and anger that had filled the chamber only moments earlier. People stood, clapping, their voices rising in shouts of agreement and relief. The courthouse, once drenched in dread, was transformed. Justice wasn't just restored, it was redefined, not by laws alone, but by courage. Courage strong enough to stand against bloodlines, strong enough to cut through fear, strong enough to remind everyone that silence in the face of injustice is never an option. And as people left that day, they carried more than the memory of a courtroom drama. They carried inspiration, the kind that lingers, the kind that whispers, even in the darkest hour, one person's courage can change everything. One voice can stop the cycle. One stand can light the way for all to see.